The replicators were an existential threat, their endless numbers a swarm threatening to consume all life in the galaxy. Desperation, not unity, had forged the alliance of cornered species. It was a fragile coalition, a last gamble against overwhelming odds, held together by necessity rather than shared purpose. In this alliance, culture, ideology, and politics were irrelevant, only the strength of one's military mattered. At the apex of this power structure stood the primordials, the original architects of the replicators. Despite the rightful accusations against them, their mastery of weaponry and ship design had proven invaluable in the few victories against the machines. Without their technological superiority, organic life might already be extinct. At the opposite end of the spectrum were humans, a species barely considered sapient by many. They had stumbled into the galactic war before even mastering faster-than-light travel. Their inclusion in the alliance was met with fierce resistance. Many argued that protecting their fledgling world with orbital defenses was a costly investment for negligible military gain. Their primitive weapons were insufficient for this impossible war. As a species, they were seen more as a liability than an asset. Exa, the coalition's chief weapons engineer, held a dim view of both the primordials and humans. While he recognized the necessity of assisting humanity against a threat not of their making, he was deeply skeptical of their wartime capabilities. His disdain for human involvement was so profound that he would alienate allies to keep them out of the manufacturing process. Exa feared the immaturity and limited knowledge of this young species would compromise the quality of any component they touched, transforming them from potential allies into a hindrance to the war effort. The mandate to provide the humans with a token task was a burden Exa struggled to bear. His predicament was clear: find a project so unimportant that failure would have little consequence, then assign it to the human engineers. With this distraction removed, he could finally dedicate his full attention to the critical work ahead, coordinating the teams from the species that mattered for the great battle that would eventually decide the fate of biological life. Exa's initial meeting with the human military engineering team was held aboard a primordial vessel far from the war's front lines. As he approached the conference room, his servants delivered the unwelcome news: the language translator was inadequately trained in both human and his species' tongues. His irritation escalated when he was presented with a device capable of translating only one word at a time, which would somehow transform a useless meeting into something even more unpleasant. His temper, already frayed, snapped. He stormed into the conference room, ignoring the humans entirely. When his gaze finally landed on them, a wave of disbelief washed over him. Their soft skin, rounded ears, and complete lack of claws or fangs spoke volumes. A silent question formed in his mind: could creatures so seemingly delicate be capable of the violence necessary for the war? The question was dismissed as quickly as it had formed. It mattered little in the grand scheme. The task he would assign them was trivial, child's play. With sufficient training, even if they failed, any other race could accomplish it in a matter of days. "Attention," he commanded, his voice echoing in the chamber. The word was instantly translated and displayed on the screen before the humans, a stark solitary proclamation that captured their full attention. The stunned silence that followed his command offered a brief respite. With a trace of regained composure, Exa attempted a more diplomatic approach. He issued a few single-word commands, which the translator rendered into longer, more convoluted phrases for the humans. Translator malfunction. Patience required, information later, solved independently. Exa intended to convey the necessity of a subsequent accurate translation using a recording of the meeting. His composure faltered as he observed several human engineers producing notebooks. Did their limited memory necessitate such primitive recording methods for mere 4 words? The label of barely sapient resurfaced in his mind. A flicker of relief washed over him when he noted that not all humans resorted to this seemingly archaic practice. Once the humans had concluded their note-taking, Exa proceeded with the core of the meeting. He handed the translator to his servants, instructing them to translate only the essential points of his speech to give the humans some context. Exa turned to the drawing board, his explanation beginning with a fundamental concept. Our galaxy-spanning fleet relies heavily on antimatter. This volatile substance powers the core of our hyperdrives, enabling faster-than-light travel between strategic points. As Exa sketched a starship on the board, his servant employed the translator, conveying a solitary term to the human engineers: antimatter. He turned to face the group only to find a chorus of nodding heads and scribbling hands. They had barely begun, yet they were already taking copious notes. The absurdity of the situation deepened his skepticism about their intelligence. Ignoring their apparent eagerness, Exa returned to the drawing board. The task I have chosen for the human contribution is critical to the coalition's war efforts. His servants couldn't conceal their mockery as he meticulously sketched a basic component of the hyperdrive core. This is an antimatter injector. Its function is to maintain a constant power supply to the core, ensuring uninterrupted hyperdrive operation. In essence, it just throws fuel into the core. Suppressing a smirk under Exa's stern gaze, the servant responsible for the translation conveyed a single concise term to the human engineers: throw. Exa was caught off guard by the humans' reaction. Instead of their usual note-taking and nods, they froze, their eyes wide with a strange intense glint. A heavy silence filled the room, which he and his servants interpreted as a sign that the humans had not comprehended anything he had said. This was entirely understandable, given the lack of a proper translation. Recognizing their reaction as puzzlement, Exa offered a conciliatory tone. The war was not their burden, and the success of this project was ultimately inconsequential. As long as they didn't squander precious time, he would gladly inflate the importance of their contribution. The blueprints of the entire core will be provided. He continued, your task is merely to produce the injector, a simple metal component wrapped in a few wires to generate the magnetic field. Even with your limited industrial capabilities, you should be able to manufacture millions of these in a few cycles. It's an easy task. This time, the servant didn't smirk and straightforwardly translated a single word, easy. A murmur arose from the human group, their hands reaching for heads and chins in contemplation. Exa and his servants were perplexed by this sudden burst of communication. Why had they waited until now, after his reassurances, to begin discussing the matter? Assuming the translation issue had caused this behavior and that it would be resolved once the humans received the full transcript, Exa offered a final cautionary note. The task is straightforward, and I expect your species to handle it. However, it's critical to approach this with the utmost seriousness. A defective injector can lead to catastrophic failures, including explosions. The servant understood the task at hand and carefully selected the final words to provide a hint of context to the humans: explosion. A flurry of conversation erupted among the humans, quickly subsiding. Exa assumed the meeting was concluded. Unsure of human customs, he turned to leave. As he did, every engineer raised a hand to their forehead in a gesture he couldn't comprehend. As Exa departed the conference room, no one realized the gravity of what had just transpired. From the human perspective, the message was clear enough: antimatter throw easy explosion. The information was sufficient, and they saw no need to request a recording of the meeting, for their minds had already filled in the gaps in the translation. The war consumed Exa's focus. After the meeting, he thought of the humans only sporadically, typically when the need for injectors arose. Assuming their project was behind schedule, he would assign the task to another species. This pattern persisted for countless cycles. Then came the ominous news: the replicators were massing their forces near the coalition's vital mining and manufacturing hubs. The shockwaves of this intelligence reverberated through the primordial homeworlds, the epicenter of the war effort. Exa, along with countless captains, generals, and weapons experts, was summoned to the War Council. Days of intense deliberation and complex simulations painted a grim picture. The loss of any of these worlds would be catastrophic. Without the manufacturing or mining capabilities concentrated there, victory against the replicators would be impossible. Any subsequent actions would merely postpone the inevitable defeat. A unanimous decision was reached to concentrate the coalition's forces on defending those critical worlds. Orders were issued for a full-scale mobilization, demanding that all fleets across the galaxy converge on the primordial homeworlds for a final desperate stand. Ships masked in 3 colossal formations formed a near-impenetrable wall in space, a dynamic defensive swarm poised to charge, reposition, or react in any manner required to repel the replicator onslaught. Exa's role in this impending cataclysm was that of a distant observer, removed from the front lines. Fury trapped in the monotony of theoretical warfare with his crew, boredom gnawed at him. Victory would bring in valuable insights for future conflicts, but defeat would likely prompt him to initiate self-destruction, a grim escape from inevitable suffering. This was a battle for the very soul of existence. With the replicators strangely absent, boredom crept in. His mind wandered through the past and future, occasionally returning to the humans. Their token project had vanished without a trace. Rumors whispered about their failure to deliver, or worse, their abandonment of the task entirely. Exa believed in a variation of the prevailing theories. He doubted the humans had simply given up the task or missed the deadline. Instead, he imagined that the replicators, who had meticulously dismantled their manufacturing hubs, had overwhelmed the human engineering efforts, leaving them without a trace of their work. The failure of the humans' contribution would, in his mind, be inconsequential in the grand scheme of the war. Yet, reality proved otherwise. The replicator fleets advanced, and the crucial defensive formation was completed. Antimatter injectors flowed into every vessel and installation, an overwhelming tide of power. With their core technology fortified by the very injectors humans had constructed, the Coalition's forces prepared for the inevitable clash. As the replicators arrived, the anticipated catastrophe unfolded. The replicators' colossal fleet swarmed the formation, a chaotic mass of ferocious swarming drones. The Coalition's defenses, bolstered by the unprecedented antimatter supply, unleashed a barrage of firepower. The battle raged with astonishing intensity. However, it was the injectors that took center stage, the linchpins of the defensive technology. As energy coursed through the hyperdrive cores, the injectors performed flawlessly, their design surpassing even Exa's expectations. Their exceptional performance, far exceeding the primitive standards Exa had anticipated, played a pivotal role in the Coalition's defense. The war's turning point was evident as the Coalition's forces repelled the replicators. The tides of the battle turned, and the Coalition's victory began to crystallize. The Coalition celebrated its hard-won triumph, but for Exa, the victory brought an unexpected realization. The humans had delivered a crucial component, underestimating their capabilities. His preconceived notions of their inadequacy were shattered, replaced by a newfound respect. In a strange twist of fate, the victory was a testament not only to the Coalition's military strength but also to the unanticipated contributions of those once deemed insignificant.